So I'd like to thank everybody for their time today. This is my first time doing a public engagement session here at the county, so bear with me. We're trying to work out any kinks as we go along, so hopefully this goes well. So we are here today to talk about the Grow Norfolk Growth Management Study with a focus on accessory dwelling units in Norfolk County. So as some of you are aware, we've developed a website called Engage Norfolk. And the idea behind the website is for it to essentially be a hub for members of the public to see any project specific items in relation to the study. So that could be any previous studies that have happened, any reports to council, questions that some individuals may have about the study, or just general questions that they want to ask in terms of how should Norfolk grow. We outlined the current goals and objectives of the study through 6 themes. That's to encourage growth to occur in an efficient and integrated manner, to encourage the necessary infrastructure that's developed, to endorse fiscal responsibility through the effective use of available financial operations by reducing land fragmentation, to protect and enhance natural environment, and to promote intensification through creative design and to support continued residential and economic growth in appropriate locations. So I'm not sure if everyone has done this or not, but we also created this feature, a map feature, where you can essentially drop a pin on the map and you can let us know what type of uses you think should take place on a specific property or a specific area, whether it's residential uses, infill development, industrial uses, or commercial uses. It could really anything, any feedback that you have or ideas that you may have. Ears are open to any feedback that you may have. You can register for virtual engagement sessions. So obviously, this is the April 7th accessory dwelling unit session. We'll be doing another session on Monday, on April 11th, specifically focusing on short-term rentals. And if you can't make a virtual engagement session, we encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to partake in these surveys that we've posted for each respective session. So there's one for accessory dwelling units and short-term rentals. So if you haven't completed those surveys, we strongly encourage you to, because that data is going to be taken for the future reports and studies that we present to council for our policy options. And if you want any more information, you can contact Jennifer Catarino, who's the senior planner, who's also in this call, and myself. We've both been working on that'll be meetings or any upcoming events as to when things are going to public open house or public hearing sort of thing. And as I said, any full-length staff reports are available on the website as well. So focusing on the housing technical paper that was presented to council and committee. So the housing technical paper focuses on sorry, go ahead, John.
Sorry, Fabian, I think you keep cutting in and out, so I'm wondering if maybe you can stop with your camera, if that will help with the internet a little bit, because we keep losing a couple words here and there.
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't know that. Hopefully that's better for everyone. If I need to repeat anything or anything like along those lines, I'm happy to repeat. No worries there. So we've identified a few housing trends throughout the province of Ontario that relate to Norfolk County. So those include reduced affordability of homes, which focuses on the increased cost of housing. The cost of houses just keeps skyrocketing, and it's becoming less and less affordable for people not only to enter the market, but to change homes, or if they need to, because they have a growing family, buy a larger house or whatever the case is. So the housing hardship concept basically focuses on the majority of income that people spend on housing related costs, and it reduces their access to home ownership because people are spending more money covering their current bills as opposed to being able to save money. So the increase in multi-generational housing, again, is having multiple families or multiple generations of families living in the same home. We've seen an increase in condominium development because you can have a larger density of people in one area, and the condominium units are generally cheaper in comparison to single detached homes, semis, or townhomes, as well as short-term rentals impacting the housing market for rentals. So the housing technical paper was specifically geared towards. Hey, Cedric, just gonna go ahead and mute you there. Thank you. The housing technical paper was geared towards accessory dwelling units and short-term rentals, and this was mainly due to the legislative changes to the Planning Act. So for the purpose of today's discussion, we'll be focusing on accessory dwelling units and of photos that indicate the types of accessory dwelling units. So the very first photo shows an accessory dwelling unit in the basement of a property. The second one shows an accessory unit above in the main floor and upper floors of a property, with the principal dwelling unit being in the basement. The third image, or the image in the middle, indicates, so hypothetically, if someone was to build an addition onto their home and locate the accessory unit within that addition. And the last two are in relation to detached or exterior structures that are located on the property, are tied to the principal dwelling unit, but they are separate from the principal dwelling unit. So the first one shows the accessory unit taking the entirety of the detached structure or accessory structure. And the last image shows a unit essentially above a garage, so attached to the accessory building. So due to the Planning Act changes through Bill 108, municipalities in Ontario can now have a total of 3 units on one lot. So that includes the primary dwelling unit and 2 residential units on one lot. So through the Planning Act, it states that you can have 1 unit within the primary residential dwelling, so an interior ADU, and you can have 1 unit within an ancillary building or structure, so a detached or accessory building. It does not allow for 2 units of the same type, so you can't have 2 interior units or 2 detached exterior units. It has to be 1 of each and the primary unit. So yeah, as I just indicated, Bill 108 implemented these changes, and it requires official plans to contain policies to authorize 2 accessory residential units. So through the PPS, at this time, there was new definitions related to housing that were introduced. These definitions included the terms housing options, which is more options for housing. And so that's where the accessory dwelling units comes in. In terms, it ties into residential intensification as opposed to for urban sprawl. It's intensifying the existing urban areas that currently exist and implementing residential uses that way, and introducing affordable housing. So affordable housing is a term that's been around for a while. It's quite subjective to each individual person, but actually changing it to be what the intention is actually providing affordable housing. So through the PPS, it states that municipalities are to provide a range and mix of housing options and densities to meet those affordable needs of the current and future needs of the municipality. And so the way that Norfolk is planning on doing so is by revamping and reintroducing the policies that currently exist for accessory dwelling units. So the 10-year Haldeman Norfolk Housing and Homelessness Plan covers this. It's increased to provide more housing options, and the overall goal of the plan is to increase the number of units available to the public. Specifically in the county, there's a major need for affordable housing, specifically bachelor and 1-bedroom apartments, followed by 2-bedroom units. And the official plan provides information regarding housing population, the housing plan provides information regarding the housing continuum, population trends, housing supply, as well as the amount of rental units constructed in the county to increase affordability. So in terms of the official plan is essentially the guiding document of the county that implements housing options, as well as the targets that we need to not only reach those targets, but also measure the amount of units that are currently approved and constructed within the county. And the policies are enabled to enact development that provides for a range of housing options that will be for low, medium, and high density forms of residential development, while focusing on affordable housing, garden suites, and accessory residential dwelling units. Currently, our official plan only permits one accessory residential dwelling unit in association with the principal unit. So now, through the Bill 108 changes, there's an opportunity to permit two accessory units, and that's one of the main reasons behind this component of the study is through those Bill 108 updates. So the official plan currently has policies surrounding garden suites. Essentially, garden suites are small temporary buildings that are separate from the principal unit. They're temporary. They contain bathroom and kitchen sink facilities. Currently, there are no minimum distances between the garden suite and primary residential dwelling, and they're only
Fabian, sorry, the last couple
association with single detached states that
Fabian?
where another.
Fabian, sorry, just
I can hear.
the last couple sentences you were like the Terminator.
Okay, that's fine. I'll go to a new spot. So where another form of special housing exists, this includes an accessory dwelling unit or a mobile home. A garden suite is not permitted. So essentially, the way it's currently written in our official plan is that where one of those types of units exists, the other does not.
Sorry, is there any way we can kind of review that last little bit of stuff that Fabian said? Because in regards to sort of what garden suites are, I completely missed all of it.
Absolutely, I can go over that slide. That's fine. I just want to confirm, can you guys still see the slideshow deck?
Nope.
Oh, okay. I had to unplug my computer because my internet, I guess, isn't the greatest right now, conveniently. So how's that? Can you guys see that now?
No. Yes.
It just popped up, Fabian.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I guess when I unplugged, my program disconnected here.
Awesome. So yeah, so if you can just start again with the garden suites.
So garden suites are small temporary buildings that are separate from the principal dwelling. They're only permitted in association with single detached buildings in the ag or hamlet land use designation. Essentially, garden suites are temporary and designed to be portable, and they contain bathroom and kitchen sink facilities, and there are no minimum distances between the garden suite and primary residential dwelling in comparison to currently in our the provisions for a accessory dwelling unit in the ag area. It has to be can only be a maximum of 30 meters away from the primary dwelling unit. So for garden suites, I believe there's no minimum distances at this time. So currently, you can only have one garden suite permitted on the lot, but the main issue, or I wouldn't say issue, but the main criteria for an for a garden suite is that where another form of special housing exists, so that includes an accessory dwelling unit or a mobile home, then a garden suite is not permitted. So currently, if you have an accessory dwelling unit on your property, you cannot have a garden suite. And if you have a garden suite, you cannot have an accessory dwelling unit. A part of the policy changes that we're proposing or presenting to the public is to amend that to allow the public to have both an accessory dwelling unit and a garden suite, but that accessory dwelling unit can only be an interior unit just because of the way that the Planning Act is written. Does that help you? Do you want me to explain anything else as part of that?
So just to be clear, you can have it's a maximum of 2 kind of additional dwellings, regardless of whether, so if it's an interior suite, you can also have a garden suite, or you can have an interior suite and an accessory dwelling in a separated building, but you can't have an accessory dwelling in a separated building plus a garden suite.
That's right.
And then to add to
And
Fabian's points, garden suites are only permitted in the agricultural area and the hamlet area. So they're currently not permitted in urban areas.
And so if you are in the agricultural area, do the accessory dwellings rules apply to the agricultural area?
Yeah, so what I've done and what we'll get to is we've taken, we've looked at the existing policies and the way that they're currently written. And basically what we've done is I've broke them down in the sense that it'll look at accessory buildings as their own separate type of provisions. Accessory dwelling units have their own general provisions, and then there will be specific provisions for interior accessory dwelling units and specific provisions for exterior dwelling units, as opposed to the way it was previously written, where it was all kind of one and the same. It was kind of confusing and it wasn't really clear. So that was part of the reason that we've tried to clean that up.
But so the major difference, if you are in the agricultural area, the major difference between a garden suite and an exterior ADU is that the exterior ADU is limited to being within 30 meters of the principal dwelling.
That there's a couple components, so that's one of them. The other components are different, and the accessory dwelling unit is intended to be more of a permanent structure, whereas a garden suite is temporary. Jen, how many years is it good for again before you have to renew?
Yeah, so the main point about the garden suite is that they're temporary in nature. So the way that the current official plan is written is that someone can apply for a garden suite, and the initial bylaw, depending on the site, the initial bylaw will be for 11 years, and then the owner, the property owner, will have to apply for an extension. And if the legitimate need still exists for the unit, we would process another temporary use bylaw for 3 years. So the Planning Act is pretty clear in that any extensions to a temporary use bylaw can only happen for a maximum of 3 years. So we would then require extensions for the garden suite until we hit that 20-year maximum. So that's another difference between the two, is that there is a bit more paperwork for a garden suite than like a permanent accessory residential dwelling unit.
And what defines the difference between a temporary structure versus a permanent structure?
The structure, there are building code requirements for temporary structures, but essentially from a planning perspective. Sorry, I was just reading the message from Carolyn. Yes, our intention is to post the recording of the meeting on the website like we did with the initial kickoff session. But from a planning perspective, we pretty much just look to make sure that you can remove the structure from the property. So some people, they keep their temporary buildings on wheels because sometimes they're mobile homes. But the crux of it from a planning perspective is that the building has to be removed from the property when it's no longer needed on site.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So I'm going to continue along here. So some of the proposed amendments for the garden suites that we were talking about is potentially changing the approval process. Currently, it's a council delegated approval, and potentially looking at changing that from council approval to staff approval. And a bill was recently passed. It was either Bill 13 or Bill 273 that allows staff to delegate approvals that way, but it needs to be approved first via council bylaw. So that's something that would happen internally, but the approval process is something that we're looking at changing and establishing in our official plan. So the staff approval versus council approval, to allow multiple forms of special housing on the same property. So one accessory dwelling unit and one garden suite, and to potentially reduce the fees to encourage garden suites as a more viable housing option throughout the county. So as I kind of alluded to, staff are proposing zoning bylaw provisions to amend the following. So to amend the existing accessory building provisions, existing accessory dwelling unit provisions, and establish provisions exclusively for interior dwelling units and a separate set exclusively for exterior and detached dwelling units. So currently, they're all kind of intertwined within the accessory building provisions, and it's hard to differentiate for not only staff, but also the public. This is something that we receive a lot of questions on and a lot of clarification questions, and there's been a lot of back and forth. So we think that this is the best way of going forward of how to differentiate them. And we'll be doing a policy review exercise with everyone involved in the call, and everybody's more than welcome to provide their opinions as to the way it's being proposed and how, if you have any thoughts and feedback, we're all ears, and we are more than welcome you to present.
Fabian, I think
ahead,
Scott has a question. So I don't know if you want to take questions now or at the end of your presentation.
Yeah, we have a section at the end that'll deal with questions, or we can even do it before the breakout session. I think that'll probably be the best thing, doing it before the breakout session. And then if you have other questions that come up during the breakout sessions, we'll tackle those as we go too. Is that okay?
Oh, that's
Can't
perfect.
see Scott's hand because I have the screen shared.
No, that's okay. I think he's happy with that. So we'll get his question at the end. Thank you. Thank you, Fabian.
So currently, as I said, accessory residential dwellings are proposed in the county. So section 5.3.3.1 has, and so these are the proposed definitions and policies that we would be looking at potentially implementing. So doing an amendment to that section in the official plan. So the proposed definition of an accessory unit would be a self-contained residential dwelling unit to supplement the primary residential use of the property. The accessory unit may be located within the primary building or in a detached accessory structure ancillary to the primary unit and must comply with the following policies. So there are the definitions that are being proposed for the interior units, the exterior units, and the total number of accessory units that are permitted. So one interior and one exterior unit. And the in bold there, how I've been saying that it would allow to have multiple forms of special housing. So the garden suite and an ADU would be permitted on the same property. So where an accessory unit is located on the lot. So this is basically saying that where you have an ADU, you cannot have a boarding or a lodging house or a rooming house. And alternatively, if you have one of those forms, so a lodging house, rooming house, or a boarding house, you cannot have an ADU. For letter E, you cannot have an ADU permitted on seasonal or resort residential uses because they're not permitted in seasonal dwellings or vacation dwellings. And they're not intended for short-term accommodation purposes. So that portion was actually specifically already in our official plan. So we're just looking at keeping that and tying it over. So F indicates that there's a criteria that would need to be followed for interior units, or sorry, for accessory residential dwellings as a whole. So the structural stability is to accommodate alterations for additional dwellings. Exterior changes need to be minimal, and it needs to comply with Ontario Building Code and other municipal and provincial regulations, and that it's ancillary or accessory to the primary unit, whether it's in a single detached, semi-detached, or it's street townhouse. would have to be ancillary to one of those uses. And that accessory units must be registered with the county, and that the county basically maintains the registration of and the documentation of those buildings. So, okay, so I realize here. So this is the accessory building proposed provisions. So these are the provisions that are specifically focused on accessory structures. So what I've done here is I've looked at the existing provisions that currently relate to accessory buildings and kind of removed, and not removed, but realigned some of these provisions that were in place to focus them specifically for accessory buildings and only looking at accessory buildings. So the one of the only changes, if in terms of accessory buildings, is that looking at letter G, so a common question that we received is that the size of the accessory building, because it was originally tied in with the same provisions, this was a common question that we received in terms of the size and scale, specifically in relation to agricultural areas. So the intention behind this is to separate accessory uses and separate accessory dwelling unit from being two separate provisions. So essentially, if an ag zone, you would still be able to have a maximum size of an accessory structure of 200 square meters, as opposed to having your accessory building account for those 200 square meters. So because farmers need space for, you know, barn and equipment, machineries type things, as opposed to having those numbers impede one another, we decided to potentially keep them separate and propose that to the public and see what the feedback would be in terms of that. That's really one of the only changes that we've proposed through the accessory building provisions that currently exist. So looking at specifically this section was dedicated to accessory general.
Good.
Sorry, these were dedicated to general accessory dwelling unit provisions. So looking at the building types that they're permitted in, which would be single, semi, street towns, and that they are only permitted in the following zones: R1, 2, 3, and 4, hamlet, residential, and agricultural zones. This is the way that they're currently regulated in the county. So these provisions are currently within 3.2.3 of the zoning bylaw. That it has to have its own exterior entrance and it cannot face the street. It would have to be along the side of a building, or it cannot have the facade of the main entrance be right on the public street. A maximum units permitted per lot shall be a total of 3, including the accessory residential dwelling unit. There would be 2 dwelling units permitted on a lot occupied by a primary unit, so the primary and potentially 2 accessory units. And where I've already said, where there's a boarding or a lodging house, you can't have an ADU, and vice versa. And that a lot can contain both the interior unit and a garden suite, but not an exterior unit and a garden suite. And that they're not permitted within a vacation home or properties designated for vacations or seasonal short-term accommodation purposes. And they're still required to meet all legislation and bylaw standards for residential units. Oh, yeah, and this part's pretty important too, that they have to be serviced either through the municipality or for properties in the agricultural areas, that they have their own private water and septic systems to service the accessory unit. And the ADUs are not permitted in buildings or structures that are for a legal non-complying, that have a legal non-complying, unless they've been requested relief from the zoning bylaw. So this component will look at specifically the interior units. So one of the proposed changes as opposed to the way that it was previously written, is clearly indicating instead of doing, previously it was based on the percentage of the primary dwelling unit that you can have. So say, for example, your accessory unit can only be 40% of the primary unit. Instead of using that percentage, we're proposing a numeric value, which is 75 square meters or 807 square feet. So that would apply to essentially if you're creating an addition onto your home and you would like to put the addition at the ADU within that addition, you can have the addition be a total of 807 square feet. One of the other major changes that we're proposing is that if it's located within a basement, the ADU can take up the entirety of the basement as opposed to being subjected to either 40% or the numeric size. It can just take up the entire basement. This is something that staff have looked at and have considered because it would reduce the amount of minor variance applications that we've received for these sort of things where people will ask for an increase in relief so that as opposed to having, say, 100 square feet having to be designated to the primary space, they can just have the entire ADU within the basement. So section C is discussing the same thing, that they have to have their own separate entrance and that they can't have an exterior entrance facing the public street, and that one parking space per dwelling unit needs to be provided, and that a minimum of 50% of front yard shall be maintained as landscaped open space, and that it complies with all other provisions of the zoning bylaw. And for detached accessory dwelling units, it cannot be within a farm building or tied to an on-farm diversified use. It must be tied to or located within the accessory building. It has to be completely tied to the primary dwelling as opposed to being within the on-farm diversified use. So again, proposing the same size of a detached accessory unit is 807 square feet or 75 square meters, and it cannot be nearer than 1.2 meters of an interior side yard and rear yard. It cannot occupy any part of the front yard or exterior yard and cannot exceed a building height of 5 meters, and it must be located a maximum of 30 meters away from the primary dwelling. And an ADU in excess of these sizes and distance requirements, people would essentially have to apply for a zoning bylaw amendment or a minor variance depending on the requested relief. And they're still subject to the provisions outlined in section 3.2.3. So that's just a recap of the changes that we've proposed. Our next exercise would be to do the breakout sessions, but there's been some interest and some questions that have been raised. So I think now that we've gone through the proposed changes, I think we should take some questions. I don't know who has their hands up first, but I guess Scott, if you'd like to fire away, now's your time.
Hey Fabian, thanks. I might have missed it. I had to step away shortly. I just want to see for the garden suites, are there any changes to the 11-year, 3-year, 3-year, 3-year to a maximum of 20-year time frame, or
So
staying the same?
We looked at that as a potential option, but the thing is it's tied to the Planning Act. So that those are Planning Act requirements, so we essentially can't change those.
Okay. Thanks.
Is that your?
Sorry, Fabian, you're cutting in and out again. I think that was Scott's question. So Helene, would you like to ask your question?
Yep, I actually have a couple questions, so hopefully that's not an issue. The first one, I mean, is there the height of an ADU in a detached structure? That was something that like right now 5 meters is 16 feet, and you've got diagrams showing an ADU above a garage. I can't get a 2-story building in 16 feet if it has, I mean, any roof space.
Right. So currently, that is what was in the existing provisions for accessory buildings. And so what we've done was we just applied that same numeric value, and we're proposing it to the public for comments such as like the one that you just provided. So in order to look at that, like what would be an appropriate size? And so we're looking for public feedback. That's one of the items that we're looking for, public feedback. So that's the reason that we've posted it that way.
Okay, well then, official statement, I do not believe 16 feet is high enough.
So Helene,
Yep.
sorry, just to follow up on that then, what would be,
Yep.
what in your opinion would be the appropriate height if an ADU was on top of a garage?
I believe I did calculations when I did the survey, so whatever I put in my survey response would
Oh,
probably
okay,
be more
perfect.
accurate than what I'm trying to remember now, but it was somewhere in the 22 to 25 feet range, because if you think about like needing to be able to put a minimum of 8-foot clear living space in, the garage to get a big truck in, and then, a living space above that doesn't feel like a hobbit house, and then being able to put a peaked roof on top of that, you need to have at least a fair bit more than 16 feet.
So
Then my other, sorry.
I think I saw in the chat, I believe it was Cedric, posted 22 feet. I think that's at least 22 feet would be the size, depends on the pitch of the roof. So he was asking the same question as you.
Okay. Can I keep going with my other questions? Should I let someone else ask a question and then circle
No,
back to me afterwards?
It's okay, fire away.
Okay, so I also had questions about the maximum distance of detached ADUs on larger properties. It seems a little strange that people who are on larger properties are going to be like, what is the reason for limiting it to a maximum of 30 meters away? If, like if the owner is going to have to provide the services and pay whatever is required to get services to that structure, wherever it is.
So that's actually a part of the reason is because, well, it's easier to provide services to a building that's actually located closer to a septic and well system. There's more potential for tying into the existing septic and well if there's capacity. The other component is the idea that these units are intended to be accessory buildings as opposed to having something, say, like 200 square meters away from the primary dwelling unit. This way it doesn't look as if they're two separate homes. The idea is to have it look more as like it's functioning as one cohesive property that has an accessory building, as opposed to, having one in the middle of a field and then the primary house being 200 square meters away.
There's also
I guess I haven't. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Helene. Sorry.
No, I guess I was just, I haven't really visualized what 30 meters is, but it's just in terms of, people who do have that bigger property. I'm not sure I understand I guess if it's the idea of grouping the structures together, maybe that sort of makes sense to me. But in terms of the services, if someone decides that for whatever reason, they want to put it away or put it further away, then they've made a conscious decision that they're going to have to run those services to wherever the building is. And so it just seems strange that the county would need people to jump through more hoops.
I think the
to
30
ask for variances on things like that.
The 30-meter distance really kind of kicks in the agricultural area where people have like hundreds of acres of land. And that's where we're trying to keep the buildings closer together, because we also have to take into consideration the provincial matter of interest for protecting agricultural land. So part of that comes into it. It's like if you do kind of look out and see you have 100 acres, it is sort of like a guide to be like, well, if you want to have an accessory structure, an accessory building, and an ADU, we're okay with that, but kind of keep it close to your primary dwelling to try to limit the impact on agricultural uses. So I think when we think of here in Norfolk, when we think about larger lots, 30 meters is I'll probably get this wrong, but it's about 100 feet or so, roughly. So it's still like a pretty big distance. So the larger lots in an urban area or a hamlet, well, they'll be able to meet the 30 meters. They should be able to, but it's really in the agricultural area where we're trying to kind of manage some conflicts when it comes to housing and operations on the farm.
Okay, I guess from my perspective, it was specifically on the agricultural areas because, for example, on our property, we have our existing septic bed for the house. We can't put, like if we were to put an accessory dwelling unit, we need to build another septic field. And so because of the size of our existing septic field, we can't really build another septic field within a certain distance because it's just not physically feasible. So knowing specifically on the agricultural side of things, if someone already has a house that has a septic field specifically sized to the number of bathrooms that they already have, it seems like they can't just spontaneously add something to that existing field because it was sized to the structure that was built in the first place. So if they have to go and put in, and it's even in your guidelines that this accessory dwelling unit has to be serviced by a septic field, then if it's within 30 meters, I mean, the septic fields take a lot of space.
So a couple things. I mean, if you're considering putting in an ADU and it has to be serviced through septic, requirements, there's also that component of you are taking that understanding that your septic system has to service the accessory unit, whether that means putting in a new septic system or another septic system to service that ADU. That's something that is up to the property owner to decide. In terms of the distance requirements, like staff, another reason that we have that 30-meter distance is to reduce the perception of the properties being two separate lots. Now with architectural design, there's been a lot more improvements, and so people have created homes or smaller homes that look like essentially second houses, and this would further eliminate the perception of that they are two separate units. So in our policy, it currently states that an accessory unit cannot be severed from a primary dwelling unit, and that's another reason for the 30-meter component there.
Okay, well, so I mean, if this does end up being kind of included as discussed in these new regulations, there is still the opportunity to be asking for variances and stuff to work around that. Or are these absolutely set in stone, unquestionable? You can no longer kind of like work around that.
Nope. So the idea is we would obviously like to reduce the amount of zoning amendments and minor variance applications that we received regarding this. But at the same time, we understand, like you've indicated, right, that some properties, there might not be the option to have it within 30 meters because of the septic location. And if there's technical reasons that are provided as to reasons why it can't be within the 30 meters, then a zoning amendment or minor variance application is a potential route that a property owner can take to request relief.
Okay, and so I guess that would apply, that would continue to apply for example, the designation that you cannot have an ADU on a property with a rooming house. Again, that just means that if one wants to do that, we have to still jump through all the hoops of all the variances and bylaw zoning stuff.
For that component of like if you're talking about doing a minor or a zoning amendment to request a relief greater than 30 meters, that's one thing. But if it's, I want to have a boarding house and an accessory dwelling unit, that's not going to be supported by staff. I mean, you're more than welcome to make your application, but at the end of the day, it goes against all county policy and staff can't support that application. We have to recommend refusal for that type of thing.
So can I ask why?
I think, Helene, we can take that conversation
Should we
offline.
talk about that offline? Okay.
I think we should talk about that one offline, because to Fabian's point, like the ADUs as an accessory residential dwelling unit is sort of accessory to one residential unit, and if we're speaking about another kind of special housing form like a rooming house, then you're sort of in like a different kettle of fish. So you're probably not looking at an accessory dwelling unit, you're looking at another use, right? So I think
Okay.
we can probably further that discussion, but it doesn't necessarily to meet the accessory dwelling unit policies.
Okay, and I have one last question, which again, you can tell me that I have to park and talk separately, but the units that go on existing structures, like on top of garages,
Yep.
the all the rules around, you know, minimum set, like the required setbacks, the fact that it can't be in the side yard or this, that, like all of those. If there is an existing garage, then are you it, like, does that somehow, like, can you still put something on top of that existing garage, or do you need to jump through all the hoops of variances because of all of those rules? Like, if the setbacks have been sort of like, I guess, grandfathered or whatever because of the already existing nature of the structure.
So I actually dealt with a question very similarly to this earlier today. And it was interesting because the person had, what they did was they built their garage, and what they did was they had a specific amount of ground floor allocated for that building. But then when they thought of introducing a ADU above the garage, they were way above, I believe it was the usable floor area of the building. So they had to get further relief through a minor variance. And while doing so, they were able to clean up any other components such as the setbacks. So it's really depends on the existing structure. Like there might be a requirement to get a zoning amendment, or sorry, a minor variance to request relief from those components. So it's situationally based.
Okay, I will stop monopolizing the conversation.
Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? Yep, go ahead. Sorry, I can't see your name. All I see is NK.
NK, you're on mute.
I can't hear them speaking. Can you, Jen?
Nope. NK, you're unmuted now. So if you have your question.
Perhaps if you write it in the chat, we can answer it that way, but we can't hear you.
Okay, so I guess we'll move on to Cedric.
Yep.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the excellent presentation. My question is along the same lines as where Helene was going, in terms of like the heights and location and all that kind of stuff. One of the other components of this was a maximum of 807 square feet. Although that may sound like a lot in a high-rise building in Toronto, it doesn't seem like a lot kind of in our area. I'm just wondering what the kind of the idea behind limiting square footage is. Again, you know, as Helene was kind of discussing, what if it's an existing garage that's a two-car garage, and you decide to build up? Are you just going to put this tiny little addition on, or do you kind of build it so it seems like it fits the existing structure?
Okay, so there's a couple of components there dissecting that question. So when looking at specifically the urban areas, the 807 square feet. So if you're looking at either building an addition attached to a house or within an existing garage, realistically, the lots are a lot smaller in urban areas as opposed to agricultural areas. So that's one of the reasons for the limiting size component. The other component is to do with the fact that the intention behind these types of dwellings is that they're accessory to the primary dwelling unit's needs. So I theoretically, like, obviously the cost of housing is really high. If you have a child or like a parent who wanted to live, can't afford a house, but they can afford an ADU, that unit is accessory to your needs, and therefore it doesn't need to be as large as the primary dwelling unit. The other component that I'd like to add is that the size that's actually being proposed is actually larger than what was previously in the bylaw, like what's currently in the bylaw. And this is the 75 square meters was once, when this topic was first introduced to the county, was actually in the bylaw, and then over time it was removed, and we couldn't find a reason as to why. So now we're proposing the opposite, where a numeric value as opposed to a percentage, because if somebody has a smaller house, they can only build a smaller ADU, as opposed to somebody who has, say, like a 4,000 square foot house, they could build a house that's almost essentially 2,000 square feet, right? So the idea there is to have some, to still allow for living space, but in terms of reducing the size through those mechanisms.
Okay. So I understand all that. Would it maybe make sense then? Because again, like you kind of highlighted my point a little bit by saying, you know, if someone's got a 4,000 square foot house, like some of these agriculture lands have big homes on them. And if you build an accessory dwelling that's only 800 square feet, it's going to look like a shed next to the big house.
That's
Like, why couldn't we do something like the 40% or 807? Like somehow incorporate both of those options.
So we had both of those options in the bylaw at one point in time, and it actually becomes an administration nightmare because you have one or the other, but then you essentially still have to evaluate both. And I think to Fabian's point, what he was saying is like, you know, people with larger houses, it sort of benefits them more so than somebody who has like an urban lot in Simcoe. And I think we're just trying to reduce the amount of frustration everybody feels when they're trying to actually get their permits to build an ADU, because part of that is also providing floor plans for your existing house so that we can actually calculate the percentage. So there is also a component of us just trying to make it easier for everybody. You know, whether we get the square footage correct, like there's always going to be a debate about the size. I don't think there's ever going to be something we propose where we're never going to have somebody who wants, you know, or needs, because of, for whatever reason, sort of like relief of that number. Like, so I think this is us just trying to get feedback on that. So we've received feedback saying that maybe it's too small. So we can take that back and reassess. But I do think we are trying to come up with something that works throughout the county, so we don't have different policies in the agricultural area than we have for hamlets and urban areas, and just to try to make it easier for everybody, the public, the builders, the development community, and staff when we're actually reviewing these types of applications.
Yeah, okay, I can understand that, but I think that in this particular case, maybe one blanket rule doesn't really work that well. That, you know, some of these ag lands are going to be much different than an urban area or a hamlet, and maybe requires some different options. I get that you're trying to simplify the process, totally get that. But I don't know that one blanket works for this.
Thank you. We'll take that feedback back and review it as staff. So thank you, Cedric.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
Personally, not me. No, I'm done.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for your questions. It's much appreciated. I think I saw NK's hand back up. I think they might have gotten their mic reconnected, not too sure. Still can't hear you.
Oh, I see your message, NK. No, we can't hear you. So if you want to put your question in the chat, Fabian will answer.
Question or questions, feel free to put them in the chat. That's okay. I'll read them out. We can talk about them.
So I guess while we wait for NK, is there anybody else who has any other questions or comments or any kind of general feedback they want staff to consider as we kind of go through this process?
Okay. Oh, Helene, go ahead.
So just to be clear, the following the provincial rule of only one interior, one exterior, and like whatever the all the interaction between number of suites across interior, exterior, and garden suites, there is no desire by the county to or ability to go to not follow that, like to allow two exterior or two interior. That is, it's a firm position by the county to follow that.
Yeah, Helene, like
Yeah.
sorry,
Go ahead. Yeah, the Planning Act sets the framework for planning in the province of Ontario. So it's not just the county that isn't going to, fight that or try to amend that. It's basically they are the governing body, and we have to implement what the province dictates. So this is the reality for every municipality in Ontario. Every municipality in Ontario has to follow the Planning Act.
Yeah, I knew that sometimes some municipalities have their own sets of guidelines that don't necessarily completely align with the provincial stuff. So I wasn't sure if there was any flexibility in this discussion. And I mean, if there isn't, there isn't.
Yeah, I'm not sure what municipalities are kind of able to skirt the Planning Act, because even to any kind of official plan amendment that council approves, theoretically has to be approved by the province itself. So I can't see them approving something that doesn't meet the provincial policy statement nor the Planning Act. So
Okay, I might have just misunderstood how, for example, certain cities have different short-term rental guidelines than other cities and stuff like that. So I may have just misunderstood sort of what I was seeing as flexibility in the Planning Act. So that's okay.
Yeah, short-term rentals are a bit of a different animal than the accessory residential dwelling units. So maybe there's more flexibility there, which we'll talk about in the next session. But in terms of ADUs, yeah, we're kind of stuck to what Fabian said: one interior unit and one exterior. But Fabian, I think Nick put his question in the chat.
Yep, I just saw that. So his question has to do with basement accessory dwelling units, and that there are limitations in place for exterior units, but he is not sure why such restrictions exist for basements. So he is a new homeowner, and he thinks it would be great to have an addition in his basement apartment for rental purposes, and he is in favor of having the entire basement renovated to your liking. So I think in terms of the option that we've brought forward and having the basement ADU take up the entire basement, that kind of coincides with what we've proposed, just because it would reduce the need for a planning application to expand the ADU to be the entirety of the basement. So this is one of those efficiencies that we're looking at for not only staff time, but also for the general public as well, because we don't want to implement something that's kind of like a catch-22 where you can have this, but you can't do it. So I think this was one of those options where we've thought about, we've considered, and we think it would be a good thing for any homeowner in the county who is looking at doing so. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's good to hear that you're in favor of that.
Yeah, I would just like to thank Nick for his feedback. I think that's good feedback for us to take when we continue on with our assessment.
So Helene's question there, so that would allow you to exceed the 75 square meter size. So if the ADU is located within the basement, that is correct. It could take up the entire basement. Does anybody else have any questions? I think Cedric still has his hands up, but I don't know if he just never put it down or if a new question popped in his mind. Okay, so it looks like there's about 10 people in total in this meeting. Do we want to split up into our breakout sessions, and we can do, I guess there's 3 staff on here, so I guess that means 7 people. So 3 in one session and 4 in the other, or 4 and 4, however you want to, or 5 and 5. I guess that would be the best way of doing it if there's 10. So what I can do is I can, how do you do it?
Fabian, I guess what do you want to have like maybe a 5-minute break and then we can go like and then while there's a break, we'll set up the breakout sessions?
Sure, that sounds good. Yeah, let's do that. We'll take a 5-minute recess if anybody needs to go to the washroom or anything like that.
Sorry, quick question. How long are these breakout sessions going to take?
Oh, so we were
so we've allocated about a half hour. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Fabian, it's all you.
So I think what we had originally allocated was a half hour per session.
And how many of these breakout sessions are there?
There's 2, so it'd be 1 hour in total.
Okay, so an additional hour starting after this 5-minute break?
That's correct.
Okay. I may not be able to stay for all of it, but I will stay as long as I can.
That's okay. So Cedric posted a question in the chat. So the breakout sessions, there's 2 sessions. The first one is kind of like what we just did with the overall policy review. And so that would give an opportunity to like provide further comments, like review any other comments and considerations that you may have. And the second session would be to also look at a proposed site plan of what the provisions would look like on a property to provide a visual and commentary feedback through that way. The one thing that I actually did want to touch on that I think I failed to mention earlier in the presentation was another option that we're potentially looking at is laneway homes throughout the county. There's not many laneways, but it is a housing option that could provide more housing throughout the county. So those would kind of be regulated through similarly to the detached units, but the horcrux of those is that they would have to front onto a laneway. So I just wanted to throw that into the conversation as well. So do we want to take that 5-minute recess and then we can set up the breakout rooms and we'll be back? Angie, we can definitely put you in the site visual one first, no problem.
Well, Fabian, I'm wondering, so if Cedric has to leave and Helene might have to leave, do we want to just maybe keep one? Like we can still take a 5-minute break because I just have to go run and grab something, but do we want to then just do maybe the site planning conversation? Because then it's easier,
sure,
I think, to talk about the setbacks and things.
Yeah, and I think we kind of just did the policy one. Not to say that we're disappointed by our turnout, but I think we might have been expecting more individuals, and that would have given more opportunity for people in a smaller session to provide their comments and feedback. So I think, we can definitely start with the site one first, since we pretty much just covered all the policy components.
Okay, awesome.
Okay,
so 2:15?
Yeah, let's do 2:15.